Welcome to this deep dive into the idea of time. We've got a lot of interesting sources to explore here: philosophy, history, personal stories, even some pop culture.
Looks like you've been thinking about how we experience time in the modern world. The pressures, the anxieties, always feeling rushed.
Definitely.
We'll explore those feelings, but we'll also consider other ways of thinking about time that might feel more expansive, more freeing.
And I think you'll find it surprising how much our perception of time is actually shaped by things like, well, the invention of the clock or the rise of social media.
We're also going to take a look at this really interesting concept of crip time.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
And see how challenging those traditional ideas about time can open up whole new possibilities for all of us.
One thing that keeps popping up in the sources is this idea of fungible time. This concept that time is basically money, something to be traded, optimized, maximized.
Yeah.
Where did that even come from?
Well, it's so deeply ingrained in how we think nowadays, but it's actually a relatively recent invention. We can trace it back to the realities of plantation slavery and the Industrial Revolution.
A book you shared, Saving Time, goes into detail about how plantation owners would meticulously track enslaved people's labor,
Right.
reducing their lives to quantifiable units of work. It's honestly pretty sobering to see how timekeeping in that context became this tool for exploitation and control.
Absolutely. The author really emphasizes how planters didn't view enslaved individuals as human beings.
Right.
They saw them as units of labor, constantly pushing for more efficiency, more speed. And this way of thinking really set the stage for this, I guess, dehumanizing idea that time is just a commodity.
It makes me think of that image of Charlie Chaplin as the factory worker in modern times, struggling to keep up with that relentless assembly line.
Oh, yeah.
It perfectly captures that feeling of absurdity.
Definitely.
And alienation that comes with, I guess, reducing human existence to just productivity.
Right. And it didn't stop at the factory doors either. It seeped into every corner of life, affecting everything from education to how we run our homes.
In fact, one source even mentions how in the early 1900s, efficiency experts like Donald Laird tried to apply these Taylorist principles, scientific management, to personal life.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine someone telling you to optimize your reading speed or minimize your eye movements, even strategize your relaxation?
It's amazing how obsessed they were with efficiency. Even our thoughts weren't safe.
Wow.
Laird actually advocated for like a division of labor within the mind.
Listen in the mind.
Yeah, contrasting the active thought of an executive with, say, a young woman leisurely reading a novel. It's like daydreaming became something suspicious in the face of all these demands for productivity.
And this pressure to be productive, it hasn't really gone away, has it?
No.
If anything, it feels like it's just gotten worse in our digital age. We're always connected, always on.
You're absolutely right. The sources talk a lot about the rise of employee tracking software,
Yeah.
monitoring keystrokes, screenshots, even facial expressions, all in the name of, squeezing out every last drop of output.
It's almost like we're under constant surveillance, pushed to wring every last bit of productivity out of our days. Even our leisure time has become, painted.
Right.
It really blurs the lines between work and life. And honestly, it's pretty unsettling.
It really is. And it leads to an interesting question. What happens to us, to our sense of self, when we start to internalize this logic of constant optimization?
Right.
Do we become more like machines, less human in the process?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Earlier, you mentioned that there are other ways to think about time, perspectives that move beyond this framework of control and productivity.
Yes.
Can we explore those a little?
Of course. One of the concepts your sources bring up is from ancient Greece, chronos and kairos. Chronos represents that linear, sequential, time-think clocks, calendars. Kairos, on the other hand, refers to something different, the opportune moment, a qualitative experience of time, not a quantitative one.
So chronos is the time we measure, and kairos is the time we feel, the time that actually matters in our lives.
That's a great way to put it. It's an important distinction because it helps us see that time might not be this uniform, objective reality,
Okay.
but rather a multifaceted phenomenon shaped by our perceptions and how we interact with the world.
One source mentions the philosopher Henri Bergson,
Yes.
who saw time as this continuous flow, not a series of separate units.
That's right.
What does that mean for how we should understand time?
Well, Bergson argued that trying to measure time, trying to quantify it, actually distorts its real nature. He believed we actually experience time as this continuous flow of moments, each one blending seamlessly into the next. He called it duration.
Duration.
And it's inherently dynamic, creative, defying our attempts to pin it down.
It reminds me of those times when you're completely absorbed in something. You lose all track of time.
Exactly.
You're not actively measuring it. You're just existing in its flow.
That's it.
Yeah.
And one of the key takeaways from your sources is that we should try to cultivate an awareness of what they call the infraordinary.
Infraordinary.
Those subtle, often overlooked details and rhythms that make up our everyday lives.
So it's about noticing the little things, the nuances of experience.
Exactly.
Appreciating the richness of the present moment without always trying to control or quantify it.
Precisely. This shift in focus can be really liberating because it lets us reclaim time as a source of wonder, of connection, of meaning, instead of this relentless pressure to produce and achieve.
It's about stepping outside the tyranny of the clock.
Yes.
Embracing a more, expansive, fluid experience of time.
Exactly.
But how do we do that? How do we actually do that in a world that seems to be moving faster and faster all the time?
That's the question, isn't it? And thankfully, your sources offer some really interesting answers. They draw on insights from fields like disability studies, social justice activism, even ecology. Maybe we can explore those further after a quick break.
So before the break, we were really starting to uncover these different ways of understanding time, moving beyond the limitations of chronos and exploring that richness of kairos.
And one concept that really stood out to me in your sources was this idea of crip time.
Right.
Can we unpack that a little bit?
I'd love to hear more about how these alternative understandings of time can be put into action.
Okay, so crip time challenges those rigid schedules and expectations that dominate our culture. It's an idea that's come out of disability activism, emphasizing adaptability, flexibility, interdependence.
So instead of seeing time as this linear standardized grid that we all have to conform to,
Right.
crip time acknowledges that our experiences with time are diverse.
Yes.
Our needs and capacities vary.
Exactly. It basically says our bodies and minds don't always follow the clock's demands.
Right.
And it really pushes back against that individualistic idea of time as a personal resource to be protected and maximized.
So it's a more communal, relational approach to time.
Precisely. It highlights how important it is to recognize our interconnectedness.
Okay.
And how things like caregiving and community really challenge that rigid, individualized notion of time that we see so much in mainstream culture.
It's interesting. Your sources also talk about this phenomenology of waiting.
Yes.
Where does that fit into this whole conversation about time?
Well, waiting can be a very profound experience. It forces us to confront the limits of our control over time. It often comes up in situations where those traditional ideas of productivity and efficiency are just suspended.
Right.
And we're forced to just exist within time's unfolding.
The sources specifically mention the experiences of incarcerated individuals and their families.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, imagine that agonizing anticipation of waiting for a loved one to be released from prison.
Wow.
Those years stretching out with an almost unbearable weight.
Right.
It's a really powerful example of how circumstances, forces outside our control, can completely warp our perception of time.
It is. This idea of time as a social fabric, intertwined with relationships and shared experiences it's really powerful.
It is.
It makes me think about how we can resist this tyranny of the clock and reclaim time as a source of connection and creativity. Do the sources offer any insights on how to do that?
They do, actually. They suggest a number of practical strategies for resisting this dominant temporal order. One is creating temporal commons.
Temporal commons.
Spaces where alternative rhythms and values can flourish. Pushing back against that constant pressure for individual optimization.
Okay. So what would those temporal commons look like? Can you give us some examples?
Sure. Imagine community gardens where people come together to cultivate not just plants, but a shared sense of time. A sense of time marked by the cycles of the seasons and the collective effort of tending the land.
I like that.
Or think about co-working spaces that are specifically designed for focused, uninterrupted work.
Okay.
Offering a sanctuary from those constant digital distractions that we all face.
Those are great examples.
Yeah.
It's about intentionally creating spaces where different temporal values can be lived and experienced.
Exactly. And another strategy the sources recommend is embracing quiet time. It's about reclaiming periods for reflection, for contemplation, just for being. Activities that are so often undervalued in our productivity-obsessed society.
It's about pushing back against that cult of busyness
Yes,
and recognizing the importance of stillness and non-doing.
absolutely. And it goes beyond just individual practices. It's about challenging those systemic structures that keep this relentless acceleration going.
Right.
Your sources actually highlight this concept of plotting, which draws from the historical experiences of marginalized communities.
So what is plotting exactly?
It refers to the ways that marginalized groups have created their own spaces of autonomy,
Okay.
established their own temporal rhythms within oppressive systems.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Think about enslaved people cultivating their own gardens on plantations, or indigenous communities preserving traditional timekeeping practices in the face of colonial pressures.
It speaks to our human resilience,
Yep.
our ingenuity in finding ways to resist these dominant temporal norms and reclaim time as a source of agency and meaning.
Exactly. It reminds us that even within restrictive systems, there's always potential for resistance and the creation of alternative temporalities.
This has been really eye-opening. I've gained a much deeper understanding of the complex nature of time.
Good.
We've looked at how our perception of time is shaped by cultural forces, how it can be used for oppression and control, and how we can resist these dominant temporal norms. Is there anything else from the sources that you think is really important for grasping this intricate relationship we have with time?
There's one final aspect I think is particularly compelling.
Okay.
It's how your sources explore the rhythms of nature.
Okay.
They emphasize how crucial it is to reconnect with the natural world to counter those artificial time pressures of modern life.
Tell me more about that. I'm really intrigued by that idea. We were talking about the importance of reconnecting with nature's rhythms, as a way to counter those artificial time pressures of modern life.
Right. One of the sources shares this anecdote about moss growing in the author's apartment. It's kind of a subtle reminder of those slower, cyclical rhythms of nature.
Okay.
Happening right there in the middle of this frenzy of urban existence. It's a powerful metaphor for how important it is to tune in to the natural world's own sense of time.
I also notice how your analysis connects climate change to our experience of time.
It's a profound connection. Climate change really forces us to confront those vast timescales inherent in these geological processes. They stretch way beyond our typical human-centered perspectives.
Right.
Events like wildfires or those hurricanes that are devastating coastal regions.
Wow.
They really force us to acknowledge that our planet operates on these vastly different temporal scales.
It's like those events shatter our sense of control over time.
Yeah.
They expose those powerful forces that are shaping our world.
Precisely. And the source points out how this encounter with deep time can evoke a sense of awe, but also this profound sense of responsibility. Our actions today, especially those contributing to climate change, have consequences that extend far beyond just right now.
Wow.
They impact future generations and the very ecosystems that sustain us.
It's humbling, but also a little daunting to realize the ripple effects of our choices across such vast stretches of time.
It is. It underscores the urgency of addressing climate change.
Right.
Not just for our own comfort today, but for the well-being of all life on Earth across generations.
So it's bigger than just managing our schedules or using time management techniques.
Much bigger. It's about recognizing our connection to the planet
Right.
and taking responsibility for the impact we have on its temporal rhythms.
It's about moving from a mindset of taking and controlling to one of, caretaking and giving back.
Exactly.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. It's changed how I think about time. I used to see it as something to be conquered, to be controlled.
Right.
But now I see it as something to be respected, engaged with, even cherished.
I'm glad to hear that. And as we talked about before, time isn't some finite resource to be hoarded. It's something we create together through our actions and how we interact with each other.
As we wrap up our exploration of time, what are the key takeaways we should carry with us as we navigate, the complexities of time in our daily lives?
It prompts us to consider what new possibilities might open up if we let go of that illusion of control over time.
Right.
If we embrace a more, expansive relational understanding of our place within its flow.
Perhaps it's about savoring those ordinary moments, cultivating that quiet time amidst the busyness,
Yeah.
recognizing the value of waiting, even reconnecting with those rhythms of the natural world.
Beautifully put. And perhaps it's also about remembering that we're part of this vast, interconnected web of life, a temporal tapestry woven through generations and ecosystems. Our choices echo through time, shaping not just our own destinies, but the fate of our planet and everyone on it.
This deep dive has given me a renewed sense of hope and honestly a deeper appreciation for the mystery and wonder that's inherent in time. Before we go, could you offer us a concise summary of the key insights we've uncovered in our exploration?
Sure. Here are 10 key points to keep in mind as you continue exploring your own relationship with time. Time isn't just about clocks and calendars. It's a complex experience shaped by culture, technology, and power structures.
Okay.
That idea of time as money is a relatively new invention rooted in slavery and in industrial capitalism. We're under increasing pressure to be productive, even in our leisure time, driven by technologies that track our every move.
Wow.
But there are other ways of understanding time, like the Greek concept of kairos and Bergson's notion of duration.
Right.
They can offer more expansive, more freeing perspectives. Paying attention to the extraordinary, those often overlooked details of everyday life, can help us see time differently. Crip time challenges those rigid schedules and expectations of mainstream culture, emphasizing flexibility and interdependence. We can resist the tyranny of the clock by creating temporal commons, embracing quiet time, and challenging that cult of busyness. Reconnecting with nature's rhythms can help us counter the artificial time pressure of modern life. Climate change forces us to confront the vastness of geological time and rethink our relationship with the future. And finally, time isn't some finite resource to be hoarded. It's something we create together through our actions and interactions.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the nature of time. We'll see you next time.